All right, all right. All of us in life, we all have things that we work for, that we are so passionate about, that we focus on and we set a goal, and then sometimes we get there. And it doesn't go like we want, and it just can be hard and throw us off course. Imagine if you have that thing that has become so important to you, and you feel like you've had a calling, you feel like you have a path, and you start working to that, and you're working to that, and you finally arrive at that day. And then on that very day, right when you're in the midst of it, you get the worst phone call of your life. And how we go from a moment like that has everything to do with how and where we go in life. Joining me today on the David Magee Show, we've been married 37 years. We've never done a podcast together. It's a first. My wife, Kent Magee. That happened to you, and I had to make that phone call, and I'm so sorry.
Yes, that was, I guess, could be described as the worst day of my life. Probably would get that prize. But so, yeah, there we were, May 6, 2013, and I loved the practice of yoga, had just completed an 8-month teacher training course to become certified to teach, and was given the opportunity to start teaching a class at the studio where I did the training. And I was given the Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. class, which I was very excited about. I was extremely nervous about, just on multiple levels, because I, number one, had never taught. It was an hour and 15-minute class. All of ours were then. I had never taught a full, complete, start-to-finish class, because it just came out of training. We had done team teaching and that kind of thing, and I had just never done start to finish. I was nervous about that. And then number two, I had this deep fear of standing in front of a group and speaking. So doing the whole teacher training was a really exercise in stepping out of my comfort zone for me. It very much was. I just had this kind of crippling fear of standing and speaking in front of a group for some reason. Like, I remember at my best friend's wedding, I was a bridesmaid, and I literally could not stand up to make a toast. And I tended to lean on you too much for speaking for me, because
Which has its pros and cons.
Never challenged on having something to say or standing up in front of a group. And I was just so petrified of standing and making a toast that I said, why don't you stand up and give a toast for the two of us?
And I did it for us.
And so, of course, he did. And I mean, that's kind of where I was mentally. So it was a really stepping out of my comfort zone to stand in front of a group and talk for an hour and 15 minutes. So then all of that, when came together to teach the first class, and then coincides with a development in our son William's situation. For the previous year, about 11 months, he had been started a recovery journey from when we realized he had a substance abuse issue. And like most recovery journeys go, it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back,
right.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward. It's very much like that for a year, from outpatient
you're
to
hopeful, you're scared, you're heartbroken,
right.
You don't know.
Inpatient to sober living to, all of the steps. And he had really gotten to a good place. We were hopeful. He was hopeful. Had moved out of a sober living and into his own apartment. And, we had close dialogue and connection with him, all of this. And then that weekend before, I taught on the Monday morning, he went silent. And, you were daily texting with him, just checking in, and he, would check back. silence all day Saturday. No answering the phone calls. Phone was dead.
And
Not
initially,
answering
you're
emails.
almost angry. I mean,
Yeah.
not you per se, but we as parents, because what happens in anybody that's had somebody struggling with addiction or at first when they disappear, you're almost mad. Like they've done it again.
But he's 23 years old.
Yeah.
He's an adult and had his own place, a job, paying his bills at that point. But then, you just start to feel like almost like this beat of a distant drum. Something's not right, And so that was like, that shadow was like getting darker and darker. And we knew something's not right. And then finally Sunday afternoon, you said, if he doesn't answer back by tonight, we need to get in the car first thing tomorrow. We're driving over there. He was living in Nashville. We were in Chattanooga, so it's a 2-hour drive. He said, we should drive over there. And I said, I'm teaching my first class.
I have a yoga class, right.
At 8:30. And actually I was so new and brand new and I didn't even know the steps to take if you couldn't come or got sick or who to call even. And, your mind, it was a very different day. That's 13 years ago. It was a different day on, I feel like, parents and families dealing with children, grown children, family members dealing with addiction. It was not so much a fear of overdose.
That really wasn't as much as of a thing in our community.
I knew nobody who had.
Yeah, we didn't know anybody who had overdosed.
Nobody who had a child of, teens up to 20, any age, adult children die of an overdose. Or else it was so buried, so quiet, and it was probably a pretty distant person that I had no knowledge of that. And my fear as a parent, going through this situation would be that we're in for this for the long haul. It's a marathon. We're facing a marathon. It might be something this might be just one dark chapter, but it might be something that he and we see pop its head up, 5 years down the road, maybe 10 years down the road when he has a wife and children, maybe later on in career, and I just thought my fear was that it would be this, bag of bricks that he had to carry throughout his life.
And part of what you learn when we were learning, we were so early in that journey, Kent, but part of what we were learning and being told at that point is, don't let this negative vortex of a tornado take your whole family down. You have to keep functioning and doing your thing. So, I kind of remember you like, I need to teach this class. You go.
Right. So the both sides of my mind were having a conversation between each other. The one side was, trying to find a rational, I'm sure there's some logical explanation. He lost his phone or spur of the moment went camping with friends and their car died. And, I just knew there was a rational explanation. Or maybe worst case, maybe he relapsed and is sick in his apartment and
or
just
in jail.
not responding or something like that. And so hoping that was the case, just said, you go, we'll talk I'll be on the phone. We'll talk the whole way. Let me go teach this class. Call me and tell me, is he hurt? I can be in the car and be there before noon, and be there with you. So that's what we did. And you drove over and I had come home from taught the class, came home, like immediately you called and said, I'm at the apartment and his car's here. It's parked right in the front door, but the windows are drawn and I'm knocking and he's not coming to the door. And you didn't know what to do. And you said, I think I'm gonna have to just smash in the window to get in. And of course it was a rented townhouse apartment, and I said, why don't you call the police at least? So somebody's going to think you're breaking in the place, robbing him. Call the police and just have them come to help you know what to do. So you did, called me back. So I was waiting for you to get the call. When the police came, and to say, to help you get in to see what he needed. And then the phone did ring. You called me back, which I was just sitting waiting. And as soon as the phone started ringing, I saw it was you. And then all of a sudden, it was 10 in the morning. One of my dear friends, my front door swung open, and she started walking toward me. And I answered the phone, and it was you. And you said he's gone. And I was like, what do you mean? He's not there? And you said, Ken, he's dead. And then she was just right there with me, like putting her arms around me. And I was like, what do you mean he's dead? I mean, call 911. And you were like, no, it's too late. And I just started screaming, kind of like an out of body experience.
I heard you drop into the floor. You just think like, that's why I'd called your friend Annie. I said, you've got to, because I was 2 hours away. You just think like for a mother to get that message and be alone. So I sent your friend over, and then I had to tell you. And I remember hearing you just kind of fall to the floor. And, in that moment, here you feet away from me inside this apartment. I've got our oldest child deceased. And then I'm talking to you, and after we had been through so much, and our family had been through so much, I knew, you'd walked out of that yoga class, you'd been clinging to that moment, and then somebody, it was like shot an arrow straight through you. And I remember sitting there on the phone and had you on the floor, and I could hear you just screaming and crying, and he's there, and you think like, where are we going from here? How are we getting out of this?
And I'm the same way there, picturing you over there at the apartment by yourself.
Yeah.
And sitting on the grass outside the condo. And, I just think you have to find gratefulness for small things in situations like this. And the officer that did come and open the door and let you in, he was obviously a compassionate
sure.
individual, and just
Yes.
went in first to check the scene, came back out and told you that he was gone, and you of course tried to go in, and he just said, Mr. Magee, you don't want to go in.
Right.
Of course I can't stop you, but don't do that.
If I were you, I wouldn't do it. If it were my son, I wouldn't go in there.
He said, don't go in. And so I'm glad that you listened and went back out and just sat in the grass and called me, and you said you never went in. Then they came and took him away,
Yeah. I mean, I saw him leaving with a sheet, but it spared me from, it allowed me to remember him as he was,
Right. So then, that day just...
I wondered, would you ever teach a yoga? So for background here, right? And it's hard, but it's beautiful hearing you walk through that, because we both lived that moment. I've often shared people get my perspective a lot. I speak, I write. They always tell me they'd like to hear your perspective. And that makes I say two of us would. And so it's so important to hear that, because I'm on one line and we're all living this life, but we're living it from our own end of the line. Even when you're in a marriage, and even when you're, a child, a sibling, friend, I mean, everybody's living it. Annie, your friend who walked in there, she has her own version, I'm sure, of that day. But you had used yoga, that, and, really drawn on yoga at a hard time when we were going through a hard time, and it felt like your family was falling apart, yoga and faith, and you grounded in these things and were kind of finding your way of survival, right? And then this happens. I remember thinking, I don't know. I mean, if I had worked all the way up to this moment, and like you said, overcoming the fear to stand in front of a group. Because when you have that fear, I have other fears, like answering the phone, but I'll stand up in front of a group. But when you have it, it's real, and you did it, and then bam, it's easy, I guess, to wonder, is this God? Is this the world telling me not meant to be? So what did you do at that point?
Well, for a moment, well, just to back up, at the beginning of this, I feel like and I say this a lot, there's no coincidences in life. I feel like most things happen in God's perfect time and for a reason. And sometimes we can connect those dots and see those dots, and sometimes you don't. But, I don't think it's coincidence that I did, like I said, this training that I did was an 8-month, and it was 1 weekend a month for 8 months, and then you're finished, And the first meeting, the first weekend that it began was the weekend that same day we had realized that William needed, he started with an outpatient counseling for drug issues. And we quickly realized, and his counselors there, that he needed a higher level of care and he needed inpatient treatment. And so we made connections, and he decided, and we all decided, that a good choice was Cumberland Heights in Nashville. And they had a bed open for him, and we dropped him off at Cumberland Heights, and then in Nashville, I had to get in the car, drive straight to Chattanooga, and within an hour or two, the whole group began and started our first and the weekends are intense. They're long days, so much information coming at you, almost like a fire hose, but I loved it. But that all happened in the same day, so my mind is just
See, I've almost forgot. I remember it now that you tell me that, but I had forgotten that was the first day.
Right. So I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? Is he, does he have everything he needs? Is he going to get a good counselor? Is this going to work? And all this swirling in my mind. And then we're going into the deep dive and all things yoga, philosophy, poses, practice, all that, all at the same time or in my mind. And then, it's pretty quickly into it. Like the leader wanted all of us to start thinking of like where you want to take your teacher training. Like if you want to teach, maybe everybody doesn't, maybe you want to specialize, maybe prenatal yoga or chair yoga to, for elderly or handicapped people, or, all the different, there's many different styles. And, of course, being where my brain space was, I thought I really want to do like yoga for therapy, for recovery, from addiction. And I knew that so many treatment centers and therapists used yoga as, a therapy, a behavioral therapy in their work. And I thought that's kind of where my heart is. And actually, I think, you look at the subconscious thinking, I thought I can figure this out and how that works, and I can use it to save William. I can help him connect the dots. And he always enjoyed yoga. He would be the one of our family,
right, yes,
to come with me wherever, we were on a trip. I went to yoga, or just at home. Anytime he was in college most of that time, but sure, I'll come. And he enjoyed it. And I always thought that's harder than a lot of people think. And I was like, yeah, it is. And, so anyway, I think that's a little bit, that was where.
So your first day of teacher training, and I remember that now as we connect the dots, but it's funny, you go live through a whirlwind of a life, and anybody listening knows these things. There's so many sometimes micro miracles and things that happen all along the way, that here we are living this life every day. And we talk about this kind of thing a lot. I mean, we nobody would accuse us of sweeping this under the rug. But sometimes there's so many top line story themes that even I forget, and I do remember that now, but that is one of those kind of miracles embedded within, and nothing happens. That is amazing. The first day we take him to treatment, you're going to a teacher practice. I remember watching, and look, to be clear, I mean, it wasn't just William. You had come through a period where you have this family of 5, and you'd been through a couple of years where just more than you've ever could imagine. You got a husband battling addiction, both of your sons, William and our son Hudson were at the time, a daughter, battling eating disorder, and it's coming so hot and fast. You're trying to keep your business afloat, to keep bills paid, when, I'm just trying to get back on my feet. I think I go back now. I mean, I can see where you were, but William was the one who was in the crisis. Hudson had come through. He was doing well. I was back on my feet. Sure, a lot of growth ahead, a lot of learning, still a lot ahead, but William was in the crisis of the moment. He was the first one to have to go to residential treatment. He was, and I remember, Kent, you early on, you're doing this teacher training, and I was supportive. I just didn't understand, so I wasn't probably overly supportive. But I remember for months, and you're the kind, like, I might jump into something. You'll really take your time. I remember early on you getting materials about yoga for addiction. And I remember we were in the car going on a trip, and you're like, I want to listen to these podcasts. I want to listen to these podcasts. And we'd been talking at times so much about it that I remember sometimes I would go, yes, but sometimes I would go, no, it's too much. And I'm sorry for that. What we know now is you were reaching and studying and learning and on your pace. And guess what happened? We lose William. You go on with your yoga practice, but you become a yoga for addiction teacher.
Well, at first I thought well, that's done. I'm for sure not doing anything in recovery space because I can't. I can't go in there, and I don't know. I just can't. I feel like I'd bring too much of my own pain, and I just thought I can't do that. Of course, I still wanted to teach, possibly, or maybe not even that, but I knew I still wanted to practice. And thankfully, the studio owner, Jessica, told me just to take as much time off as I wanted before I came back, but the class would always still be there for me to teach. But she said, why don't you try 2 weeks and just, come and practice, whatever, and then just see if you're ready, if you want to teach or whatever. So I did. And of course, I wanted to push it out further, but I thought I've got to just kind of walk right through the fire on this, because then at that point, of course, everybody knew, and especially my yoga community. Well, everybody in town knew, but of course, but my yoga community for sure. And, I just thought, this is too important to me. I did too much work. I don't want to be a quitter, and I just want to, so I came back.
Took your 2 weeks off.
Took the 2 weeks off, and came back, and I'm sure, gosh, if I could see a recording of those classes, the first, months and even year, I don't even know how I got through it. I don't know how it went, I remember
trying to say something to you as you were preparing for that first time you went back in 2 weeks. And now anybody that knows you, you've been yoga teacher for more than a decade in our community where you live in Oxford, Mississippi, where we live in Oxford, Mississippi. You're considered, people tell me you're one of the, ones people respect the most, and you're one of the more popular, for lack of a better word, yoga teachers. And you don't have to really prepare. You just have it by memory. You've done so many classes, but at that time you had not. And as you said, you'd only taught one class and that happened that day. And in 2 weeks, you're, I'm sure, dealing with all the emotion. I remember trying to talk to you maybe an hour out as you were nearing going out the door, and you had these sheets of paper of your rhythms that you were going to, progressions or whatever you call it in yoga. I don't, what do you call it? I don't know what you call it.
Like a flow, a
The
sequence.
flow, the flow. You're
A
going,
sequence.
you're going through the progressions or music. You're going through the flow, and kind of recite, kind of get it down and make sure you've got it. And I remember saying something to you, and I remember you had you had this loving intensity, which said back to me is, "I'm not comfortable. I'm not prepared. Don't speak to me. Whatever it is, speak to me later." And I remember zipping it and walking out of the way, but you went and did it, and that first day after William had died, the first day of those 2 weeks, you recall, this one's pretty documented because I've written about it. It was a part of the Dear William book, but it was maybe 7:30 in the morning and I wasn't getting out of the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And you walked over and kicked the bed, and said, "Get up, David, get up, get up. The dog's got to go out. I've already been out once. They got to go out. Get up." And I remember you kicking. You kicked the bottom of the wood frame of the bed. Like, "Get up," and gave me a little bit of a healthy tension, annoyed thing. And I got up and I got moving. And, I suppose 2 weeks later, you go back to yoga, and when I'm trying to talk to you and you're feeling that tension, that's what you were doing. You're kind of kicking yourself to.
Well, it was a blessing that I had just with that much grief, and loss all of a sudden tearing your life apart. I had responsibilities that I owned a business at the time, a small business that I, managed and ran and worked in every day. And eventually I had to go back to work. My small part-time staff, had really stepped in and covered for me, and they were, becoming weary. I had to go back to work. Had to get up every day, get dressed, and try to put some lipstick on and get out the door, and then, that was a lifesaver for me, as well as then having just a community, in my yoga community. We had William's funeral. So William passed away. That was a Monday. The following Friday, I guess, was his funeral. And then 2 days later, that Sunday was Mother's Day. And so that timing was, of course, especially hard. And so that was on a Sunday. And I kind of routinely went to, there was a Sunday morning class at the studio that I routinely went to. And just 2 weeks before, William had come home the weekend before he passed away, the weekend before he, went dark, and then we didn't hear from him. And he had gone to that Sunday morning class with me. So the last time I'd been to the class,
Oh, wow.
he and I, just the two of us, got up and went together, And so then, it's the following week, funeral Friday, then Sunday morning, it was Mother's Day. My routine was to go to that yoga class. I hadn't been to the studio since he died. Our days were just filled with
It's a blur.
funeral planning and all the things and coordinating all that and family coming in. And I just thought, I need to go to that. I need just to go be with those people and go. And William and I had just gone together, and so thankfully I had that. And I went that morning, and I know everybody there. It's a big and full class, but had so many hugs and from everybody there, and tears shed. And I'm just so thankful that I had a community like that, and did practice that day. And that's kind of one of the beautiful things about having practices, which, it can happen in prayer or meditation time, that your quiet time that you have at home. But, when you have that, like a container, like a space, like having this regular yoga practice. So I went that morning, started going through the practice with the class, and William came and appeared like his soul and spoke to me in that class so clearly, so loudly in my mind that I literally was startled, and I was not expecting it. I wasn't thinking maybe I'll hear a message, anything like that. I was totally shocked and blindsided, but it was his voice clear as could be. And he said, "Hey, Mom, I'm okay." And I mean, I was just shaken because I wasn't expecting it. It was so clearly him, and it was so him speaking to me. And if I had just been busy running through the day and trying to get back life as I knew it and head to the grocery and just try to start getting back to my life, I would miss those things,
Yeah.
So, there's just lots of little things to be grateful for in the pain.
One thing there's been so many growth moments, making sense out of grief, reconnecting with your son in that moment after his death, finding some peace. But as you talked about, me watching one little sideline, just watching you say that, it's so beautiful. You don't have the same fear of speaking. Yoga has done. I watch you now, like you stand up in front of a big crowd. You'll go and tell them. We had this national cameras from CBS come in here, and they started rolling. There would have been a day you would have said, "Well, I'm not doing that," and you did it, and you do this, and I don't know. I mean, who knows where you would have found that growth without yoga, but I don't know. That's where it came from, because
nobody grows unless you step out of your comfort zone, and it's not easy to do. It's really not easy for me to do. I don't know why I was even felt so nudged to do it, but I did, and I'm very grateful I did. And the more you do anything that's uncomfortable like that, I feel like it just gets easier. I was telling like our recovery group that the other day, and we were talking about for them to first come and sit down in a AA meeting and then start opening up and sharing. It's always optional, but encouraged, to share your own personal experience or pain, or, how things have affected you, your story. Everybody has a story, every single one of us. And at first, to open your heart and start sharing that to a group of people feels so raw and so exposed, and part of you wants to feel like you're going to be judged, but then, like that's the beauty of those safe spaces, that everybody there is there for the same reason. Everybody suffers from some kind of addiction, from,
the phone,
maybe drugs or alcohol,
right.
But maybe a lot of, there's a lot of other ones as well. And but once you do speak up, tell your story, it gets easier every time that you do it. And it just leads to healing. So much healing happens from doing that.
There's no question. And you see others looking back at you as you're sharing your story. And even if they're not supposed to speak or interrupt, you see in their eyes, they know. Mm-hmm. And so you began, you did decide, that day came. It was years after William's death, maybe 6, I think. We'd returned back home to Oxford, where we had lived and moved away, and where William had gone to college. And as we began to kind of share our story and tell our story, you decided, and I remember the day you told me, because we talk about it along the way, you say, "I don't know, maybe I will one day." Well, that one day arrived, and you said, "Well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start a yoga for addiction class, a 12-step yoga class to help others." And it didn't exist. There was not one in the entire state of Mississippi. And not only, maybe you by then had grown in the ability to speak, but you had to go make flyers and put them all up over town, I would have just absolutely panicked. It reminds me of like the feeling of when I'd write a book and go to a book signing, and nobody'd come, and you'd think, well, this is awful. I absolutely thought I wanted to write books, and I feel sick. Well, you want to help people with yoga for addiction. And I remember you said, I went around campus. I drove out to the Starbucks and I put a flyer on the wall, and I was panicked for you.
I was pretty panicked.
What if she does this and nobody comes and she wants to help somebody?
Right, which the method that I teach, the format for the group that we have here that I started is called Y12SR, which stands for the Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. And we have a closed Facebook group of people who lead those all over the country and actually the world. And it's a very common post. I've had the meeting 2 or 3 weeks in a row. Nobody has shown up still. And I don't know what to do. I'm trying, and it's a definite possibility. It's one of those, thankfully, the universe sent me support on that very first one, and 17 people showed up for the first meeting that we had. At the gym. We were holding it at the church that I'm part of, OU Methodist, and we were meeting in the gym. 17 people showed up, which I was just stunned and excited, and it was great. And that was 7 years ago, and there's definitely been peaks and flows when we have 17 and have to move rooms because we can't put that many mats down in the room where we've since moved out of the gym, to times when there are 2 people that show up. And then, we were saying, did I ever feel like giving up? I would say I went through a spell that I was trying to judge how worthy or how beneficial or how, the meeting was received by how many bodies walked in the door. And I finally came to realize that was really too much ego based on me. And I needed to let that go. And I worked really hard to let that go, because sometimes, and I said, the people that need to be there will show up. Everybody's divinely where you're supposed to be at any given moment. Maybe they're taking time off their schedule. Maybe they'll come back, and usually that happens. But I had to let that go, because sometimes the most meaningful, the most I feel spirit-filled and just full of connection meetings that we do a short circle, group share with a reading and a 12-step type reading, and then we do a yoga flow that kind of fits with it. Sometimes the very most magical meetings, I feel are the ones with 2 people there, maybe 4 people there. Right. It's just the connection is so, and some who maybe do have a little bit of a fear in too full of a room, sharing too much of their story, feel a little more confident and safe in a very small group, and that shows, and they're it's just how it's supposed to be. Yeah. And it's just it unfolds how it's supposed to, but it's all good.
I've run in over the 7 years to so many times people in the community, and we lost a child, and we lost other things that we worked really hard to reclaim and regain, but it does make a difference when you are able to help others and you can find a purpose. And I've run into so many people over the years that, and it's an anonymous class. You don't come home and tell me who all's in there, what goes on, but somebody will stop me and go, your wife saved me. This class saved me. And it makes a difference. It's also, though, hard, and we've both experienced this, and I experienced this. You decide. So many people, when they lose a child, I was talking to a gentleman not too long ago who's had a son die by suicide last year, and he's like, I'm starting to do this work. I want to help and save people. And I remember telling him, that's awesome, and you will, and you're needed. But just know you will lose some. And that's the hardest lesson, I think. You do get to save and heal so many people, and you have been called a miracle worker, and your class has been, but also you open yourself up to more heartache because you feel so much of these people, and they're human. And sometimes humans like our William or others, they stumble and they can't get back up. And so it takes an emotional a commitment and an understanding that you got to take care of yourself and your own nurturing, because sometimes you would come home from those meetings, maybe in the earlier years. It's less so now as you've been at, but you didn't even really want to talk so much because you just absorbed an enormous amount of other people's pain.
Right.
It's
It
like
can be
this
heavy.
sponge.
It can be, just doing any of that kind of work. It can be heavy at times, would just feeling so much of other people's pain. But yeah, it takes kind of some tools to let that go after, have a little bit of detachment from it and to move on.
And one of those is you have your own yoga practice. Tell me, if you can, like obvious things like we talked about. You overcame fears of speaking and getting, but even in your own practice, not necessarily being a teacher, what do you get out of yoga, and what do you hope people that come to your classes get out of it?
Well, that's interesting. We had a conversation, which actually I taught a class this morning, and I shared our conversation with the class this morning, which was, as long as I've practiced yoga now, which is, quite a few years, 15 years, something like that, and pretty regularly, this last Saturday morning, David, you said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to yoga class. And you kind of laughed and said, I think I know the answer to this, but do you ever get tired of going to yoga?
Because you've been going
I know,
now for more than
because
a decade.
it's very frequent. Like, I'm going out the door and you go, where are you going? It's like, I'm going to
Or you're
yoga.
coming in, you're showering after yoga. It's pretty common.
Yeah, just kind of usually part of my daily life. But I laughed and said, well, no, obviously I don't. But, it's not to just try to explain it. It's not, yes, you're drawn to the physical practice, but there's such a community that is built around it, which is special. And it's not that way with every studio, every place you go. Fortunately, the studio where I first was introduced to the practice, did training and all that, was very much a community. And the same is, well, here where I practice now. And it's not, I said, so I asked myself the question, if there was a projector, I knew today there was going to be no people there, just a projector in the front of the room, but I would go put a mat down and follow along with a yoga class by, any number of people. Would I be as drawn to go do that every single day? And the answer would be maybe not. Maybe, but maybe not.
It would be more workout, not community.
Right. And maybe it'd be even sit there in quiet meditation, not just physical workout, but maybe not. But it's really the combination of that and the community. Because I said there were like 25 people in class Saturday, and I'd seen the list, and I probably knew 20 very well.
And it's men, it's women, it's people of different ages,
men, women,
students.
Many that I don't really see very often outside of the studio, but they're there, and it's, I talk with them, and we all, just kind of have this support and, conversation before, after. And oddly, I feel like it's just maybe hard to explain, but like the connection that you have from doing something together, being kind of in the same work, sweating beside somebody day in, day out, that you feel this sense of kinship that I almost feel like I could have a deep conversation with anybody there. And that's what I'm drawn to. like on the Enneagram personality test, I am a 5, which means a thinker and tend to overthink things. I like my quiet time. I like time alone for sure. I can get kind of overstimulated in a big group, but and I don't have a lot of tolerance for small talk. And I know that many of us kind of move through life and through the world with this coat of armor on the outside. We do it for protection, we think. I mean, it's just
Yeah, right. It's
to
the
look,
opposite, right?
To look like everything's good and okay and fits your, and smile on. And it's special to get a group of people that you don't have to have the armor on. It's like some people call it the bodyguard. Like everybody has a bodyguard that really puts their face forward first when you maybe meet somebody new, and it might take 5 times of speaking to that person before you feel like the bodyguard steps aside and you see the real individual and what their thoughts are and fears are, and it's not just oh, and the weather's nice, and yes, I'm fine. That's the depth of the conversation.
And it's so important, anybody, like when you go through, and I that's how you were drawn to it in the first place, is you were going through such a hard time, marriage, family, life, years ago when you first began. Yes, the practice involved community, and it made a difference. And,
people find their community all different ways.
If people find
it's
it
not like I've
ways.
always say, I'm not yoga's the be all end all cure for everything and everybody. You can find a lot of what it brings in other ways, other groups. But yes, whatever you find, community is like oxygen, your friend group, your support, and we all need that.
All right. She is Kent Magee. This has been awesome. 37 years. We did it. Check. We did a podcast together. How about that?
It was great.
I didn't talk over you one time, did I?
No. Still continuing to step out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
I don't mind speaking in front of a group, a small group especially, but yeah.
Yeah. Hey, the great thing about here is just you and a microphone.
Right.
It's the David Magee Show. Follow us wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. Check us out next time.